Hello, this is Barry Jones again on Standards Plus History Academy, and we are about to begin episode 11. If that doesn't sound right, it's because I kept saying in episode 10 that we were doing episode 9. So the last episode was actually episode 10, and so this will be number 11. Something else I wanted to clean up or just review quickly before we proceed. One of the interesting topics that we mentioned over and over again, actually, in episode 10, was the fact that some of the evidence was starting to point to Lee Harvey Oswald being connected to American intelligence. And I just wanted to quickly review what we know so far that connects Lee Harvey Oswald to intelligence. One of them, this is sort of anecdotal, was what he said about being a patsy. That is not a common everyday term, especially back in 63. That was a mafia or intelligence term. So the fact that he used that word. Secondly, in his evidence, in the evidence that they found in his home was a Minox spy camera. Of course, we established the fact that these were not publicly available. You had to be in a spy agency in American intelligence to get your hands on one of these cameras. And of course, he had one. A third piece of evidence is the fact that his only phone call that he made in the short time he was in custody was to Raleigh, North Carolina, to a John D. Hurt, who was in American intelligence, Army intelligence, and was part of the NAG's head training for fake defectors. And of course, we haven't covered this yet with Lee Harvey Oswald, but he did defect to Russia for 2 years, 2+ years, a little bit, before coming back to live in the States in Dallas. So, you know, and the fact that Bobby Kennedy, this is number 4, made him an informant in exchange for allowing him to come back to the United States, an FBI informant on the CIA, is a huge clue, because Bobby would not have made him an FBI informant to tell him what he knew about the CIA if he wasn't in the CIA and had inside information. You don't make somebody an informant who has no access. He wanted information on the CIA. He knew that he'd been in Russia. Bobby did, in the fake defector program. He was a CIA agent. So by making him an FBI informant, he was making a CIA agent, somebody who was in the CIA, a spy for the CIA, an asset. He was using that person for inside information. So that's a huge clue as well. And then lastly, the tip from the FBI informant to the Chicago FBI field office that there was an assassination plot afoot on November 2nd. And it came from somebody who only gave the name Lee. Well, what's interesting about that is he named, or he said that there were 4 Cubans. And then later they added into that the Thomas Arthur Valley, the Chicago Patsy. But the fact that he named the 4 Cubans as part of the assassination plot, who were those Cubans? Well, you know, we didn't even know they arrested 2 of the 4 Cubans. We didn't find that out till years later when Abraham Bolden, the Secret Service agent in Chicago, told the world that they had actually arrested these 2 of them, and he knew the names. One of them was David Morales, and the other was James Braden. Well, David Morales was a widely known CIA assassin, and James Braden turned out to be a spotter for David Morales. The next time those 2 were seen was in Dallas. In fact, James Braden was actually arrested in Dallas for being in the Deltex building right after the assassination. They released him. And then later he was found, he was in Los Angeles in 68 when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. This guy is everywhere. Something's going down. But the point I'm going to make about these 2 guys is that they're both CIA. And so for an FBI informant to know that these 4 Cubans, 2 of whom are confirmed CIA, are part of an assassination plot to kill the president, that tells you that Lee has inside information. And it's inside information about the CIA. And about an assassination plot. So you maybe just one of these one of these pieces of evidence does not tie, it can be explained away. But when you start putting all these pieces together, it's pretty clear that Lee Harvey Oswald had very strong ties to American intelligence. So I wanted to kind of briefly go over that again before we go on to today's question. Today's question is, quote, was Jack Ruby part of a larger conspiracy? He didn't want you to think he was. After they arrested, of course, Jack Ruby in this famous picture here on the top, uh, walks into the underground police parking garage there. And as they're transporting Lee Harvey Oswald to a waiting car to take him to the county facility, Jack Ruby walks right up to him at point blank range, shoots him once in the stomach, and kills the alleged assassin. And what he said was, I just didn't, I was distraught about the assassination. I felt sorry for Jackie. I didn't want her to have to come back to Dallas and appear in a trial, relive the whole horror of her husband being killed. And so by taking out Lee Harvey Oswald, he foreclosed on a trial. That was his public statement. Pictured there below is the newspaper article of Ruby after he dies in prison. The interesting thing is he has just been granted a new trial. His first trial was thrown out on appeal. And of course, on his first trial, he was convicted and sentenced to death. So they appealed it. And on the appeal, the death sentence is thrown out. Actually, the conviction is thrown out. He's going to get a new trial. And one of the stipulations that the judge made in this retrial to Ruby was, this time you have to talk. Ruby didn't say anything in the first trial. He just let his attorney, who basically sold him down the river. He let his attorney handle everything. But in the second trial, Ruby was going to have to talk. So coincidentally, right after the court rules that he's going to have a retrial, he is found to have cancer, and within 28 days, he's dead. It was literally that fast. And he'd never had any issues with cancer before. This was just either, if you believe in coincidences, it was a huge coincidence. If you don't believe in coincidences, then you know anything about what the CIA was up to in the 70s, you find out through for example, the church hearings, you find out that they used cancer as a way to get rid of witnesses so that people would think that they died of natural causes. But that's neither here. We're going to talk more about that later. I just wanted to explain these two famous photographs here. And so today we want to answer the question, was Jack Ruby part of a larger conspiracy? I'm going to show you some photographs here, show Jack Ruby after the assassination as Oswald is being paraded around from room to room in Dallas Police Headquarters. The media is hanging out. There's just a lot of people in the hallways, and everyone's trying to get a look at the alleged assassin. And included in that mix is Jack Ruby. You see him, I have a white circle around him in the top left. Here he is leaning in on a press gaggle, and he is larking there, just kind of hanging out. There's a press conference going on, and in one of these occasions, he actually interrupts and corrects the DA, the Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade, who misspeaks when he's trying to identify the pro-Castro organization that Oswald had been a part of when he was in New Orleans. Ruby actually raised his hand and corrected him. Said, no, it's the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And so here he is, just lurking. Here he is again. I say he's stalking his prey. He's waiting for an opportunity. He's just there. He's ever present. He said, well, how could he be there? Why would the Dallas police let him be there? Well, there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, he's very familiar with the Dallas police, and we'll explain that in a minute. And he knows them because of the line of work he's in. He comps them. They're in his nightclubs all the time. He's down at the police department all the time. They know him and he knows them. And so for him to be hanging around wasn't that big a deal. They all knew Jack. He's also posing. As you can see there, he's got a little notepad in one hand, he's got a pen in the other. He's posing as a writer. He's not a writer, but he's posing there. So with all the other writers, all the other media members. So, but as far as official capacity, he doesn't have any. He's just there as a hangers-on, stalking the Dallas Police Headquarters. And Nobody knows it at the time, but he's waiting for an opportunity, that is proven out, for an opportunity to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald. And so here he is again, mingling with the post-assassination crush at Dallas Police Department headquarters, standing in the hallway, just biding his time, just standing in the hallway. So let's talk about this Jack Ruby. Who is this guy? His real name is Jacob Rubenstein. He's a Jewish guy from Chicago, and everybody knew him as Sparky. That was his nickname. Uh, as far as what he was in Dallas, after he came to Dallas from Chicago, he was, for the police, he was a CI, which means he's a confidential informant. And this is in the line of work he was in. He was privy to a lot of illegal activities. Obviously, he was a nightclub owner. So illegal gambling, prostitution, drugs, things of that nature. And he was used by the Dallas police to squeal on mainly his competitors. So they both got something out of it. He got a little bit of money being a CI. He also got to put some of his competitors out of business. The Dallas police got arrests and busts. So that's one of the reasons why the Dallas police are pretty cozy with Jack Ruby. He comped Dallas police officers all the time. You know, in that kind of line of work, you need security. And so in order to have Dallas police come to his nightclubs and hang around and be sort of a presence, he'd give them free drinks, free food, free entertainment, which you can use your imagination what that means. And he also provided this to the DA's office, and he got a couple things out of this. Number one, he got sort of free security. It wasn't completely free, and to give them drinks and things of that nature, but um, people knew if they went to Jack Ruby's nightclubs, there were going to be Dallas police officers there. And there's less, when you know that, there's less reason to get into any kind of trouble because you know the police are there. And then because you also are comping the DA's office, you're escaping any legal liability of your own because they're getting something out of the deal too. So you're getting security and basically immunity from prosecution, and the Dallas police are getting obviously the perks of his business, but also getting tips on illegal activities and things of that nature. So he was a regular at Dallas Police Department headquarters. So this was not that out of the ordinary. If it had been, Dallas police would have chased him out, you know, but they didn't. And he's on. There's a lot of documentation. He spoke with people time and time again. By the way, this is the only place he was after the assassination. He was also seen down at Parkland Hospital. So he went. He's kind of like a groupie, you know. He followed the crowd, and at first the crowd went to Parkland Hospital. He had a long conversation with Seth Cantor, who is a writer in the stairwell there at Parkland Hospital. So we know he was at Parkland Hospital, and then after the president was declared dead, and after they arrested Lee Harvey Oswald, now all the crowd moves to Dallas Police Headquarters, and Jack Ruby follows him. A little bit of background: he grew up in Chicago, and he joined Al Capone's. You know, Al Capone had the largest crime syndicate in the world at that time, and everybody in Chicago was in some manner, shape, form involved in it. And so he was an errand boy growing up for Al Capone's crime syndicate. And then as time went on, he rose through the ranks. He graduated to become a top Teamsters Union slugger, which means he's basically an enforcer. And he worked for Paul Dorfman. His job basically was to protect the union workers who are striking against people who are trying to break up the strike. So you're basically, he was a head thumper. He was arrested in 1939, suspicion of being involved in the murder of a rival Teamsters boss. Rivalry between two Teamsters leaders who are trying to take over the union, and one of them gets murdered. Obviously, he had picked a side. He was working for Dorfman, so there was suspicion that he was part of the plot to kill off the rival. He was released. There was not enough evidence to hold him. And of course, then after Cook died, guess who took control of the union? Dorfman did. And Ruby was his right-hand man. So you could make an argument and this is anecdotal, like I said, they didn't have the evidence, that he got away with murder, and Dorfman got away with murder. And their whole agenda was to get rid of their opponent so that they could take over the union. That's exactly what happened. And another topic, when we get into the mafia angle of this, we'll talk about how the Teamsters Union became a piggy bank for the Chicago mob, and later the mob that was moving out into Las Vegas and things of that nature. The Teamsters Union had a lot of money, and it was because of all these. It was one of the largest unions in the country, and these truckers and everybody who belonged to it paid into this union for their pension. And this pension fund just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the mob saw this as a great opportunity. They were basically hand in glove with the Teamsters. The Teamsters were was a union, but it operated with a lot of mob help. And so the mob used the Teamsters pension fund as their own personal piggy bank. And if you're the mob, you can't go to the bank and get a loan. So you've got to figure out creative ways to finance your projects. And the Teamsters Union that's the big reason why Jimmy Hoffa ended up going to prison later. But anyway, so it's clear that as in his role as a Teamsters Union official, he is fraternizing at the very least with a lot of mafia people in Chicago. Then World War II comes along, and Jacob Sparky Rubenstein got served in the war, and when he came back, he kind of lost his position. And so the Chicago mob tried to find a place for him. They said, we're going to send you down to Dallas to open nightclubs down there in 1947. So this is 2 years after the war ends. We want to establish a beachhead down in Dallas, and you're our guy. So Ruby relocates down to Dallas, and he gets seed money from the Chicago family, and he starts the Silver Spur in 47. That lasts about 5 years, and it goes under. And then he starts the Carousel Club, which was the club, as you can see here in the background, you see the Carousel Club. Here he is pictured with two of his showgirls. And in 1963, when all of this is the time frame that we're talking about, the Carousel Club was also failing. It was it was losing money, and of course he owed money to Chicago for all the startup, and he couldn't pay. He was behind in his payments to the mob, and he also had some problems with the IRS, and he was in big trouble with the IRS if he didn't pay up his taxes. So there was some talk that he'd been skimming from the mob, and what I mean by that is he owed the mob payments each month or week, however they delineated it, and he was shorting them and pocketing the difference and saying he was crying poor. So he was living dangerously. Let's just put it that way. Between 1947 and 63, that's you're talking about 16 years there. He's in Dallas. He's arrested 9 different times for various misdemeanors and liquor violations, kind of petty stuff. He never faced a trial. All of that cooperation he gave the police department, the DA, always seemed to come in handy and keep him out of serious trouble. Ruby was not just a nightclub owner. Remember now, he's got connections to the mob. And during the 50s, the mob was very interested in what was happening in Cuba. There was a civil war going on. The American government supported Fulgencio Batista. So did the mob, because Fulgencio Batista, being our guy in Cuba, let American businesses, the American government, pretty much do whatever it wanted in Cuba as far as business is concerned. It also let the mob come in and build hotels and casinos and brothels and things of that nature. Cuba basically was a giant ATM machine for America, for legitimate interests like the government and for illegitimate interests like the mafia. But in this civil war, the mafia tried to support both sides, fearful that Batista might lose. So they want to curry some favor with his opponent as well. So they're covertly supporting Fidel Castro as well. And they're supplying Fidel Castro with guns. And the point man for the gun running operation was Jack Ruby. The guns were being run through Dallas and from Dallas down to Cuba. And Jack Ruby was in charge of all this. So then we get the Cuban Revolution in 1959, but Castro had, in support, in exchange for the mafia's support during the Civil War, always indicated that if he won, he would continue the sweetheart arrangement with the mafia that they'd had with Batista. But in '59, when he won, he double crossed the mafia and kicked them all out. He shut down their casinos, he shut down their hotels, he kicked all the mob out of Cuba. He wouldn't even give them. They had to flee, leave their money in the bank. They just had to flee for their lives, and if they didn't get out in time, he arrested them. One of the prominent mafia bosses he arrested was Santos Trafficante, and put him in jail. And of course, in the aftermath of the revolution, Castro and his brother and Che Guevara running around Cuba, killing everybody that didn't support the revolution. I mean, just it was like a genocide down there. And he had condemned Santos Trafficante to die. He was gonna be executed. So the American mob, trying to save one of their own, sent Ruby, because they knew Ruby knew Castro because he'd been giving him guns throughout the 50s. And so Ruby went down to Cuba on August 8th, 1959, and stayed for about a month. You can see the time frame there. He's from August 8th, 1959 to September 11th, 1959. And he's down there trying to sweet talk Castro into allowing Santos Trafficante to leave and go to the United States. He said, listen, I know you don't want him here. And I know you want to kill him, but for me, to do me a favor, because I did you a favor. And the reason you're in power is because of my guns. We would be very grateful. And of course, Castro knew who we meant. That was the American mafia. If you would release Trafficante to me. And so that's what happened. Trafficante came home on a plane with Ruby and set up shop down Florida and became the Florida crime boss. And so he's got connections to the mafia like crazy. It's laughable that in '64, after the assassination, the Warren Commission comes out with a report and says Jack Ruby didn't have any mafia connections. I mean, it's downright laughable if you just go back to his start. And it's not just, remember now, organized crime and the CIA were working together to try to assassinate Castro in the early 60s. And here, this is 1963, we're talking about the assassination. So from the time Castro took power, literally on New Year's Day, 59, 60, for the next 3 years, the mafia and the CIA were working together trying to overthrow Castro at the minimum. And later we find out that there were 643 attempts on Castro's life by these two organizations. They were two heads of the same coin. So if you're connected to one, you're really connected to both. You can't distinguish between the two. They're indistinguishable. So let's just look real quickly at the mafia connections and CIA connections that Jack Ruby has. First of all, we've already established that he came up under Al Capone. You don't get much bigger in terms of organized crime figures than Al Capone. That was where he got his start. Okay, that's well established. And then Santos Trafficante, the Cuban prison visit to get Santos Trafficante released from a Cuban jail. It was Ruby who made that happen. Okay, the mob sent him down there. Ruby petitioned and made a personal appeal to Castro, and he made it happen. Who is Santos Trafficante? We'll talk more about him later. He was present at a very famous meeting called the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami when CIA reps and mafia reps got together and worked out a plan to assassinate Castro. One of the guys there was Santos Trafficante. So again, the tangled web. Santos Trafficante's mob, but he's meeting with the CIA. All right. In the month before the assassination, when they ran Ruby's phone records and they see who he's been talking to on the phone, it was a who's who list of mafia/CIA people. First of all, he talked several times with J.D. Tippit. You remember J.D. Tippit? He was the cop that was killed on the street, and they said it was Oswald who did it. J.D. Tippit turned out to be very close to Ruby. He was a police officer on Ruby's payroll to come to his and provide security at his nightclubs. So Ruby is very connected to one of the victims on this November 22 nightmare. He also had phone calls or phone communication with Carlos Marcello. Carlos Marcello is the crime boss in New Orleans. And Ruby, in the summer of '63, went to New Orleans and bought some of his showgirls from Marcello in New Orleans to bring back to Dallas. All kinds of witnesses saw him in New Orleans, hobnobbing with Carlos Marcello, eating at his 500 Club downtown New Orleans. I'll tell you a story later about him and Oswald together in New Orleans at the cancer labs. I mean, it wasn't like he was trying to hide it. That's who he bought his showgirls from. When he needed new showgirls for his Dallas nightclubs, he went down and got them from New Orleans. And of course, if you did that, you had to get the blessing of the big man, the boss in New Orleans, and that was Carlos Marcello. Dallas was also Marcello territory. And so any operations that Jack Ruby's involved in Dallas, he's working at the behest of Carlos Marcello. All right. While he was in New Orleans, he had interactions with David Ferrie. Witnesses put him talking with David Ferrie. David Ferrie is a pilot for Carlos Marcello. He's also a private investigator who worked for Guy Bannister. Guy Bannister and all those CIA people that were part of the Operation 40 operation that was training grounds at Lake Pontchartrain and in the areas around New Orleans. David Ferrie was involved in that. He was helping run guns from New Orleans into Cuba. He was also part of the CIA operation trying to overthrow Castro. They called it Operation Mongoose. It was originally Operation 40, and then it was changed. The name was changed to Operation Mongoose. It was the CIA operation to overthrow and or kill Castro. David Ferrie was an intricate part of that. He was also part of a program that was CIA called Medical Manhattan. I won't get into that today. Medical Manhattan is a top secret bioweapon program. It was being run out of New Orleans. They used his houses, 2 of his houses, as labs for that project. And he was a mentor to Lee Harvey Oswald. They tried to say, oh, David Ferrie had no connections with Lee Harvey Oswald. There's a picture. When David Ferrie was running the New Orleans chapter of the Civil Air Patrol, one of his students was Lee Harvey Oswald, and they're pictured in the same picture together. And so, that was when Lee Harvey Oswald was a teenager, but that's when they met. And, Lee Harvey Oswald, to the day he died, on the day he died, when they searched his pockets, he had a library card in his pocket with David Ferrie's name on it. So they're very connected. Robert Mayhew was a government lawyer for the FBI and the CIA. He was part of that Fontainebleau meeting where all these mafia bigwigs and CIA representatives are meeting, trying to hammer out an agreement to assassinate Castro. He was in charge of Howard Hughes' Nevada operations. So he has his fingers in a lot of things. So he's got having phone calls with Robert Mayhew. He's also on the phone with Sam Giancana, who is the boss, the new boss in Chicago after Al Capone died. And he was also present at that Fontainebleau meeting. So, 3 of the biggest crime bosses in America were at that Fontainebleau meeting. You got Sam Giancana, you have Carlos Marcello, and you have Santos Trafficante. All 3 of those are in constant communication in the month before the assassination with Jack Ruby. Another mobbed up guy is Johnny Rosselli. Johnny Rosselli is the liaison that brought all these parties together. It was Johnny Rosselli who brought the mafia to the table to meet with these CIA bigwigs to hammer out this agreement. You got to have somebody who can bring the parties together. These crime bosses are not just going to go meet with government officials unless there's somebody they trust on their side who has vouched for them, said, hey, this is something that we want to be a part of. Johnny Rosselli was that middleman. He was that liaison. And he was also at that Fontainebleau meeting. By the way, He was also in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. So, and then there was one other, Charles Dutz Moret, who is Lee Harvey Oswald's uncle. And he's a bookie in New Orleans from Carlos Marcello. He's kind of a low level mafia guy, but he's mafia nonetheless, and he's related to Oswald. All of these people were known by Jack Ruby and were in constant communication with Jack Ruby. Al Capone got him his start. Santos Trafficante owed him his life. I mean, you can't tell the story of Jack Ruby without telling the story of his relationship with the mob and vis-a-vis the mob and its desire to get rid of Castro, his relationship with the CIA. It's all tied up. It's like one big ancestral family. It's like a tree with no forks in it. Uh, Bobby Kennedy, when he saw this phone list, couldn't believe it. He said, this list is, quote, almost a duplicate of the people I called before the Rackets Committee. In the 50s, Bobby was famously involved in the McClellan Committee that was trying to prosecute the mob, and he was bringing subpoenaing all these mob affiliates to Washington to testify, and it's the same people. It's the same people. I briefly just mentioned that Ruby had connections to Oswald, all kinds of witnesses. The Warren Commission will come out and, as if it's not dumb enough what they said that he had no connections to the mob, they're going to double down and say he had no connections to Oswald either, in spite of the fact that that picture existed of them in the Civil Air Patrol together, and in spite of the fact that multiple witnesses saw Ruby with Oswald in '63. In New Orleans in the summer, they were seen together at the cancer labs. Again, we'll talk about more of that later. They were seen together at Carlos Marcello's 500 Club, sitting at the same table eating. In Dallas at Ruby's Carousel Club, again, they were seen together. In Florida at Key West Airport on their way to Cuba, it turns out that Ruby did not go to Cuba by himself to get Santos Trafficante out. One of his one of the fellows that went with him was Lee Harvey Oswald. They were seen at the Key West Airport together. So these guys are buddies, you know. And here we have one of the most iconic photographs in the history of our country, Oswald being paraded out, and his accomplice and all these things that we just discussed. He's got this relationship with this guy. He sees Ruby. Ruby walks right up to him and says, Oswald. That's all he said, Oswald, and shoots him. And of course, then they tackle him. And this was all seen on live TV. And American people are watching this. They're like, wait a second. Up until this happened, I've talked to quite a few people, when they watched all the coverage of the assassination, they were, and then all the subsequent talk about the arrest of Oswald and all his connections to Russia and his communist leanings and the gun and all the evidence that we've discussed. Well, that's the guy. And then when this happened 2 days later on national television, Ruby walks up and shoots him. People start to smell a rat. People start to smell a rat. It was like, wait a second. Wait a second. What's going on here? And this was they accomplished one thing, that the conspirators, by preventing a trial. They didn't want a trial because, as we've discussed already, a lot of the evidence was exculpatory. A lot of the evidence would have cleared him. It's not an open and shut case as much as we thought it was. They don't want a trial, and they're afraid what he might say. He's already said he's just a patsy. Somebody's going to ask him on the stand what that means. And so to keep him quiet, they want to, obviously dead men tell no tales, right? So let's kill him. But the double-edged sword of that is the American people, who were not suspicious yet, became suspicious after this. Not of a majority of them, but it was enough to plant the seed of doubt in a lot of people's minds that the government was telling them the truth. So let's retrace the steps of Jack Ruby in the days before the assassination. 3 days earlier, before he kills Oswald, on the day before JFK was killed, November 21, 1963, Jack Ruby was talking with the Assistant District Attorney Ben Ellis, and they're having this conversation at headquarters, and he says, "You probably don't know me now, but you will." And Ben Ellis thought, "Oh, that's kind of interesting thing to say." And so uh, after he kills Oswald, Ben Ellis remembers this. He's like, "Huh, I wonder if this is what he was talking about. You probably don't know who I am now, but you're gonna." And of course, the whole free world knows who Jack Ruby is on November 24th, because he's just killed the alleged assassin of JFK. So he sits down, he writes this letter to the chief of police in Dallas and says, "I don't know if this means anything, but this is what happened. This is what he said. Take it for what it's worth." All right. Uh, the next day, on November 22nd, the day JFK was killed, Bob Vanderslice, who's an FBI informant, uh, now he won't testify of this until 1977. So we don't find out about this till about 15 years later. But he does finally testify in 1977 at the HSCA, House Select Committee on Assassinations hearings. He says, "Well, I did run into Ruby, and on the morning of the assassination, Ruby contacted him and asked if he'd like to, quote, watch the fireworks." And he said, I just remember him saying that, thinking, well, I know the president's coming to town and there's going to be a motorcade. It's kind of a funny choice of words, the fireworks, to describe a motorcade. Nevertheless, they got together. And Vanderslice says that he was with Jack Ruby standing at the corner of the Postal Annex building, which faces the Texas School Book Depository. So they're looking right at the depository building across the street at the time of the shooting. So they're watching the motorcade, but they picked that location to stand there and face the Texas School Book Depository and watch the motorcade. And he had said, "Would you like to watch the motorcade with the fireworks with me?" So they did. And so clearly on November 21st, he says something interesting to Ben Ellis. And then on November 22nd, he says something interesting. The first thing he said to Ben Ellis intrigues Ellis enough to immediately record this, document this, and give it to authorities. The second one, Bob Vanderslice just kept it to himself until 1977, didn't tell anybody. Minutes after he shoots Lee Harvey Oswald, this is according to testimony by the Dallas Police Department interrogator, a man named Don Archer, and they had Ruby in a cell. He was wired to a heart monitor. This is standard operating procedure during interrogation. His heart was racing. He was breathing heavy. He was sweating. They gave him a towel so he could towel off. He kept getting up and pacing, and he wasn't making any sense. He was just rambling incoherently. He kept asking for cigarettes, and he was cold. He kept complaining about being cold. He was shaking. And Don Archer thought, well, he's in distress. He knows this is a death penalty state. If Oswald died, they haven't heard yet if Oswald's dead. If Oswald dies, this is a death penalty case, and he knows Texas uses the death penalty. So that's what he's nervous about. And that would be the natural assumption. Archer had been in this position many times before, and that was a perfectly natural response. So it was very interesting to Archer that after a policeman poked his head in the interrogation room and announced that Oswald had died, he said Ruby sat down, he stopped sweating, his heart rate returned to normal, he stopped rambling and talking nonsense, he relaxed, he smiled, he started joking around with Archer and the other officer in the room. His breathing, he stopped breathing so hard. He wasn't shivering, he wasn't shaking anymore. He stopped pacing, he sat down, just relaxed. And when Archer asked him if he wanted a cigarette, he says, no, thanks, I don't smoke. It was like Ruby, until he knew that Oswald died, was just a nervous wreck. And then as soon as he heard that Oswald did die, it was like, okay, I did my job. And he relaxed, and everything was cool. And Archer made the comment, it seemed to me, he said the response should have been the opposite. You know, he should have fell apart. You know, he was nervous. That I understood being nervous before he found out that Oswald died. But as soon as he found out Oswald died, he should have fallen apart. That's what most everybody would do. That natural response to that, but he didn't. And so to Archer, it appeared that Ruby's life depended on Oswald dying. If Oswald didn't die, Ruby didn't do his job, and there'd be hell to pay for him. So uh, that's a little bit of a little background on Ruby. And of course, I've got a lot more to share about Jack Ruby, but um, I want to tell this little story as an addendum to this because we we talked about in the last episode the gun and how it wasn't an open and shut case, that everything about the gun was an open and shut case. There were receipts, obviously, that proved it was Oswald's gun, but there were no fingerprints. And of course, there was the dispute about where it was found, when it was found. Marina said it was in the garage. The Dallas police are saying, no, we found it on the 6th floor. But two of the officers says, no, that was a German Mauser. So we got all this hanky-panky about the gun. Well, Oswald, after he is shot and killed by Ruby, is sent down to Paul Grudy's funeral home. You see Paul Grudy here pictured top left. And he tells this story. It was his job. He performed an autopsy on Oswald. You can see Oswald there in the top picture. The autopsy has already been performed. And now his job is to get him dressed and ready for burial, for funeral. And so he cleaned him up. He put a shirt and tie on and a jacket and clothes and combed his hair and all those things. And he was just finishing up in the back, and there was a knock on the back door of his funeral home. And he went to the door, and the FBI was there. And one of them was carrying the gun, and they had toolkits, what looked like toolkits with them. And Paul Grudy says that they asked if he would leave, and they wanted to come in and have a look at the body. And when Paul Grudy asked him, "What's the gun for? What do you need the gun for?" They said, "Well, it's for comparison purposes." And so Paul Grudy just assumed they knew what they were doing, so he left them alone, and he went to the front and left them to have privacy in the back. When he came back, Oswald had oil all over his hand, and it had gotten up on the cuffs of his shirt and on the jacket, and on both hands, and not just the fingers, but also the palms. And he was disgusted. He was upset about it. He's like, I got to do all my work all over again. He had to take all the clothes back off, clean his body again, put the clothes back on, getting ready for burial again. And wouldn't you know it, the next day the FBI announces that they've found a palm print and a fingerprint on the Oswald rifle. So, you know, up until this point, I showed you J. Edgar Hoover's statement where they had found no fingerprints, no palm prints on any part of the rifle, any part of the 38. They'd searched it, they'd taken that thing apart, they'd searched and searched, no fingerprints. But then the day after they make that visit to the funeral home, they have a fingerprint. So, you know, the whole point of this story about Jack Ruby is to show you that what the Warren Commission said about him, i.e., he had no mafia connections. Well, we just showed you that he had reams of mafia. That's the only connections he had. That was his family. And then, as such, because the mafia was in such close contact and working associations with the CIA, he had associations with the CIA as well. Now, they weren't his direct bosses, but the CIA and mafia were working together. So he had connections with people on both sides. The Warren Commission said he wasn't connected. So that's clearly false. And then they also said he wasn't connected to Lee Harvey Oswald in any way, shape, form. It was just this random shooting. It was like he said, he felt bad for Jackie, and he came in, took care of Oswald, so Jackie wouldn't have to come to a trial. Well, that's not what the witnesses said. That's not what the picture showed. The evidence shows that he had all kinds of connections to Lee Harvey Oswald, and you know, so there are two falsehoods right there in the Warren Commission right off the bat about Jack Ruby and his background and the people that he ran with and the people that he knew. And then when you factor in how he hung around the, first of all, Parkland Hospital, and then secondly, Dallas Police Headquarters for 1 day, 2 days, waiting for this opportunity, and then finally getting the opportunity in the basement to kill Lee Harvey Oswald. So it's like he's stalking his prey, waiting for the right chance to get this done. And then some of the interesting things that he said to people in the days leading up to his moment of glory, so to speak, indicate that he had foreknowledge at the very least, right? And then his reaction to being arrested and waiting to hear if Lee Harvey Oswald had died, and his distress until that happened, and then being completely relaxed after he found out it had happened. When you factor in who his bosses were and that he owed them money and he was skimming from them, and you factor in some other details I will share with you later about Jack Ruby, it's pretty clear that Jack Ruby had a part to play in this assassination plot. His part was not to kill the president. His part was to be a cleanup man on aisle 5. And his responsibility, as far as cleanup was concerned, was Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, there was a scenario where he wouldn't have been needed. If Oswald had been shot and killed in the time at the time of his arrest, none of this would have been necessary. But he wasn't. And once he was arrested and now was in the custody of the police, the people that wanted him dead needed somebody who could mingle in law enforcement, in and amongst the law enforcement at Dallas Police Headquarters, and do so without raising suspicion. And as we've established, he was like this. He and the Dallas Police were simpatico. They used each other. He was at Dallas Police Headquarters all the time. So him being there that weekend was not a surprise. It didn't raise any suspicion until it was too late. So the key here is that since dead men tell no tales, there's not going to be a trial. And if there's not a trial, you don't have to prove anything. You can put out evidence. You don't have to back. It's just the court of public opinion. There's no defense attorney to pick apart your story. There's no evidentiary process. There's nothing. There's no rules. And so you can convict somebody in the court of public opinion much easier than you can in a real courtroom. So once there's no trial, the evidence doesn't even have to line up. The evidence doesn't have to be, and you don't have to present all the evidence. You could cherry pick which evidence you want to present to the public. So that's the point of that whole scenario. And Jack Ruby was a very important cog in that. And as I said, we will talk a lot more about Jack Ruby because I got a lot more evidence about him. I just wanted to kind of, we're introducing people. We're in the introduction stage of this case, and I want to introduce some things that are just clearly observable right from the get-go, that anybody can observe. And it paints a picture. Once you get away from the moment and you can kind of settle in and look back on it, you start to see what this is. And his part in this larger conspiracy was to silence the witness. Okay, that's that, and appreciate you watching. Hope you learned something. If you like what you hear and see, feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell, and also give me a thumbs up. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend. Thank you.